Welcome to Johann Sebastian Bach story, the story of the boy who sang in the streets. This is the house in which Johann Sebastian Bach was born. This house stands in the town of Eisenach in Germany. It looks very much the same today as it did when Sebastian was a little boy. Many people go there to visit this house because the little boy grew up to be a famous man. In Eisenach there is a statue of Bach near the palace. In the same town in which Sebastian was born, there stands on the top of a hill a very famous castle built many hundreds of years ago. This castle is called the Wartburg. When Sebastian was old enough, he used to travel afoot, just as the minstrels did. His purpose was to go hear fine organ players. Once, as he sat weary by the roadside, someone threw a herring to him so that he might eat as he rested. Little Sebastian's father was named Johann Ambrosius Bach. He too was a musician, as his people had been for years. One of these was a miller who played and sang while the corn was grinding. His name was Veit Bach, and his little boy was named Hans, the player, because he too loved to play the violin. When Sebastian was 10 years old, his father and mother died, so he went to live with his brother, whose home was a few miles away. Of this brother, Sebastian had music lessons, and he improved so rapidly that he used to beg to be allowed to play the pieces in a big book in the library. But the brother refused him this pleasure. However, little Sebastian was eager to learn all the music he could find. So, he used to sit up on moonlit nights and copy these pages while his brother was asleep. But what do you think happened when he had copied everything in that big book? His brother found out what he had done and took all his precious music away from him. If you know any boy who's about 20 years old, you may say to him, "Bach was as old as you are when Benjamin Franklin was born in Boston." And although there was this difference of 20 years or so in their ages, we may think of them at work in the world at the same time. You must remember that all men like Franklin and Bach who became famous did so by working very hard. Franklin, too, was born very poor. Once he walked the streets of Philadelphia with a loaf of bread under each arm. But by being faithful in all he did, because of the friend of all his countrymen, and of kings and queens beside. Benjamin Franklin was quite a little younger than Sebastian Bach, but there was a famous man who was almost exactly Sebastian's age. The man composed an oratorio that is loved by everybody. It is sung in cities and towns all over the world, especially at Christmas time. Do you know the name of the oratorio? If not, you can surely learn by asking someone or by looking it up in a book. Write in the name of the composer of this oratorio below the picture, and write on this line the name of the oratorio itself. The composer's name is George Frederick Handel. The oratorio, which is called Messiah, was first sung in the Irish city of Dublin in 1742. At that time, Sebastian Bach was living in Leipzig and had been for years at the head of the Thomas School. He was known as its cantor. Bach worked very hard here to supply music for several of the Leipzig churches, and he worked so well that his fame spread until it reached the ears of the Emperor. Frederick the Great was also a musician and composer, so he invited Bach to visit him at his castle. There were many people present, but Sebastian Bach was the principal guest. He played on many of the Emperor's fine pianos. When he reached home again, he composed a musical work and dedicated it to the Emperor. The kind of piano that Sebastian Bach played on was not called a piano in his day. It was called a clavier or a clavichord. Someday you will study a collection of pieces by Sebastian Bach, which was written for this instrument, and it was called the well-tempered clavichord. This is the kind of piano or clavichord that Bach used. And here's the beginning of the very first piece in the collection of which we have just spoken in Bach's handwriting. Sebastian Bach had a very large family, 20 children altogether. 2 of them studied music faithfully with their father. One was Friedmann, for whom the father wrote a book called Little Preludes. Friedmann's brother, Philip Emanuel Bach, was a very fine clavichord player. He wrote a book about music and composed many pieces. Sebastian Bach died in 1750. He was 65 years of age. Benjamin Franklin was at that time 44 years old, and George Washington was 18. This is the way Johann Sebastian Bach wrote his name.